Yes, so this afternoon we're going to be looking at objective 10, and that is going to be the open movement philosophy. So we're going to basically be learning what is the open movement and what are its benefits, what are its disadvantages, and why the world is basically pushing for this open movement, basically. So, for the open movement philosophy, we are gonna come across terms such as what is open source, open educational resources, OER, Creative Commons license, open data, open source versus public domain. Those are some of the information we'll be looking at today. All right, so firstly, we can look at what is the open movement philosophy. But firstly, before we get into that, have any of you ever heard of these terms before? Open source, open data, public domain, open movement. Any of you ever heard of those terms?
No, sir.
No? All right. So firstly, we're going to look at what is the open movement. So, so as I just pasted here, the open movement seeks to work towards solutions of many of the world's most pressing problems in the spirit of transparency, collaboration, reuse, and free access. It encompasses open data, open government, open development, open science, and much more. So, to give you an idea what this is basically saying, we can ask ourselves firstly, when you're going to use some sort of software, when you're going to play some sort of game, or read some sort of book, or do something, watch some sort of video, what is the first thing that you would usually have to do? Watch a movie, play music. What is the first thing you would have to do? That a normal person would have to do. We're talking about illegal stuff. We're talking about a normal, everyday person. No idea? So a normal person is supposed to pay for services. You're supposed to pay for watching a movie. You're supposed to pay for listening to music. You're supposed to pay for using software. You're supposed to pay for playing a game. Yes, we know that some have their free versions. You have free versions of movies and videos and music and games and so on. There's a free version. But then you also have the popular versions of movies and games and software and so on, and we know that we have to pay for those. Now, what usually happens is that these high end software, like for instance, Microsoft Office, that's one of the most popular application in the world, Microsoft Office. And you're supposed to be paying for Microsoft Office. So, Microsoft Office, the current one is 365. Let's see if we can see the price. What is the price for Office? Get Microsoft Office. So what is the language in? Where is English? Where is English? Am I on? Why is it giving me a French website? That is like so weird. Let's see, Microsoft Office for one person. So $6.99 a year for Microsoft Office, and so that's basically $6.99 per month. $69.99 a year, $6.99 a month. So the most popular application, Microsoft Office, everyone has to use it. You guys have to use it as students to do your assignment, to do your IA, to do your schoolwork. Persons in the business world have to use Microsoft Office to do their work, to type letters, and so on. But you have to pay for it. And that can be a difficulty for some persons, that they cannot afford the software basically. They cannot afford to pay for Microsoft Office. They cannot afford other software also, like for instance, Adobe Creative Cloud. So this gives you access to Photoshop and those software. Let's see, $4.99 a month. So get access to, that's going to be Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere, Acrobat, and so on. That for no, that's not $4.99. That's $54.99. And if we calculate that, that's 1 month. And if we calculate that, 54 times, say 220, that's almost 12,000 Guyana dollars a month. You have to pay to get access to these software. Can any of you afford $12,000 to pay for a month for software?
No, sir.
No, not even myself, and I'm working. So that's the problem we have today in society. Yes, you have the persons who can pay for software, but then you got the other half of the world who cannot afford software, who cannot afford certain things. So, what the open movement philosophy is about is to basically allow transparency, to allow collaboration, free use, and more importantly, free access to software, to certain tools, and so on. It allows you to get access to services without having to pay for them. Like for instance, going back to the same Microsoft Office, we just saw that it's $69 a year. Um, have any of you heard of LibreOffice?
Yes, sir.
So that's a free version basically of Microsoft Office, like a substitute. And it gives you most of the applications that you're going to get if you were to, like if you're using Microsoft Office. So what is LibreOffice? Looking for the list of software.
Or if you want Microsoft Office itself, you could just use the online version
Got it.
instead
That
of paying.
right. That is also there. So it's on the side here. So um, writer, that's a word processor. So that's going to be equivalent to Word. Calc, that can be equivalent to some Excel. Base is going to be equivalent to Access. So this is what we call a open source software, in that it's open to the public. The public is free to use this software. They don't have to pay for it. They don't have to buy it. It's free for them to use. So anyone can be able to have access to it. You don't have to be well off in order to do that. So that's basically what the open movement is heading towards. A world basically where everyone has equal access to resources, so that it's not only limited to persons only who can afford it. All right, are we following so far? Any questions from anyone? All right, so no questions. Next, we're going to look at what is open source. So the term open source refers to something people can modify and share because its design is publicly accessible. So just like LibreOffice, you don't have to pay for it. It's free for the public, and you're also allowed to modify it. Well, I'm not fully sure about LibreOffice, but an open source software would usually allow you to modify it. But technically, not all of them would allow you, because even though they're open source and they're free to the public so that they can be accessed, sometimes there are certain restrictions that they may have. And that is where the Creative Commons come into play. So when we come to that part, we'll learn about how they can restrict open source software. So the term originated in the context of software development to designate a specific approach to creating computer programs. Today, however, open source designates a broader set of values, what we call the open source way. Open source projects, products, or initiatives embrace and celebrate principles of open exchange, collaborative participation, rapid prototyping, transparency, meritocracy, and community-oriented development. So this last part here, a lot of technical words. Basically, what it's saying is that open source allows you to work together with other persons, so that it's not only a company who is basically getting money to develop a product. Regular persons like me and you can come together and work on this software. We can come together and build the software, add features to it, add tools to it, design it how we want to design it, so that we can get it to do what we basically want it to do. So that is basically the end goal of open source, or you can say open source software. So what is open source software? Open source software is software which with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance, sorry. So what is this term source code? Source code is basically the code, the programming language that you use to write a program. So for instance, if you search for what? C programming language, the programming language C, and so this is what we would call the source code. These instructions here, and they all come together to create the software. So that code that we use to write that software, to design that software, we will usually call that source code. So open source software is making that source code available to the public. Anyone can inspect it, modify it, and enhance it. Source code is the part of the software that most computer users don't ever see. It's the code computer programs can manipulate to change how a piece of software, a program, or application works. Programmers who have access to the computer source code can improve the program by adding features to it or fixing parts that don't always work correctly. So as I said, the open source software, the purpose of accessing the source code is to basically add features that you want. Like maybe the software doesn't take pictures, but you want it to take pictures, then you could add that feature in. Or maybe it does have the feature to take pictures, but it doesn't work properly. So now you have access to the source code. So now you can modify it so that it works correctly for your for whatever you would have to use it for. So that is basically what is open source. Are we following so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. So open source or open content refers to any creative work that others can modify or copy. And what is a creative work? So creative work involves artwork, literary work, music, paintings, software. Basically what we're learning currently to create, video, those kind of things, those are called creative works. That it is highly improbable that two persons may have created the same work independently. So it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that two persons are going to create the same type of music, create the same software exactly, looking the same, working the same. Not impossible, but it's a bit unlikely for that to happen. So we usually call those creative works, and that is why they would usually allow them to be copyrighted, because it's unique to that person. That person would have taken the time to create it. Let's see here. Open content, open content creative works allows for its contents to be reused, revised, remixed, and even redistributed by persons to anyone without any breach of copyright laws. So we would have learned about the various types of copyright laws, the various types of protection that we have for our creative works. So we know that when we create something, we want to protect it so that others don't share it, resell it, and so on. But there's some persons in the world who want their product to be used by everyone. They want their service to be used by anyone. They want it to benefit the world, basically. So that is what the open source allows, for them to freely use the product without being prosecuted by copyright laws, basically. All right, so if no questions, we're going to move on to open educational resources. All right, so now, what is open educational resources? So open educational resources are learning, teaching, and research materials in any format and medium that reside in the public domain or under copyright that have been released under an open license that permit no cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others. So, anybody want to try give an explanation of this here? What do you think this means? Open educational resources.
Um, they're basically teacher materials that have been released under license that allows them to be free used, changed, or shared with others.
Very good. That's simple. So, educational resources, educational materials, because we know you still have to pay for them. You have to pay for textbooks, you have to pay for educational videos, you have to pay for whatever somebody create as educational, maybe audio recordings and so on. You would usually have to pay for those. So, once again, students might not be able to afford that, teachers might not be able to afford that. So the OER allows these resources to be freely accessible for learning process, for learning only. So notice here, this is kind of like a restriction. You have free access to this content, these educational resources, but it's not for you to use and sell back to make money. It's for you to use so that you can educate, so that you can teach. It's freely available to you. Great. So that is the OER. Um, any questions from anyone so far?
No.
License. All right. So next we're gonna look at the Creative Commons license. Now this is what I was talking about, the Creative Commons. Now, open source, as we've learned so far, open source gives you free access to the software. It tells you plain that, look, you can modify the software, do whatever you want with the software. That's what open source means. But sometimes you might want to give like certain restriction. Like for example, the OER. Yes, the educational resources is freely available, but not for you to do whatever you want with it. You can't go and resell it. It's only available for you to teach, for you to educate. So the Creative Commons came into play to help with that situation, to help with the restriction, you can say, for content, creative works, basically. So let me paste this here. Right. So the Creative Commons copyright license and tools forge a balance inside the traditional all rights reserve setting that copyright laws create. Our tools give everyone from individual creators to large companies and institutions a simple and standardized way to grant copyright permissions to their creative work. So it basically allows them to say how a person is allowed to use their creative work. The combination of our tools and our users is a vast and growing digital commons, a pool of content that can be copied, distributed, edited, remixed, and built upon, all within the boundaries of copyright law. So, copyright law is basically the overall protection that this product is yours and nobody is allowed to use it. Nobody's allowed to reuse it and sell it and all of that. But as we said, the open source, you want to make it available. But at the same time, you still want the copyright laws to be controlling it. So the Creative Commons allows that balance between the two, between it being free to use and still being under protection. So the the Creative Commons has a few laws, a few license examples. So these are some of the Creative Commons license. So whenever you see CC, two C's, CC, that is the acronym for Creative Commons. Now, after that CC, you can notice some other letters. You can see BY, SA, BY, ND, NC, and then a combination of it. So we have to memorize what are each of those license basically. So we can start with the first one, attribution, CCBY. So this license lets others distribute, remix, adapt, and build upon your work, even commercially. So notice they can sell your work as long as they credit you for the original creation. So say for instance, you made a music video or you made some sort of song. Now you gave it a license of CCBY. What that's basically saying is that persons are freely allowed to use your music. They can edit it, they can remix it, they can do whatever they want with it, but they must credit you as the creator. you are the developer of it. They must see every time they post it, every time they're going to sell it, that you are the original creator. So this is the most accommodating of license offered. It's recommended for maximum dissemination and use of licensed material. So that's attribution. Are we clear on that one?
Yes.
Great. So the next one is attribution share alike. So notice the BY is basically attribution and SA is share alike. So a combination of attribution, what we just learned here, and now we add in an additional license term, SA. So this license lets others remix, adapt, build upon your work, even for commercial purposes, as long as they credit you and license their new creation under the identical terms. So this license is often compared to copyleft, free and open source software license. All new works based upon yours will carry the same license, so any derivatives will also allow commercial use. This is the license used by Wikipedia and is recommended for materials that would benefit for incorporating content and so. Anybody want to try explaining this one?
So isn't it like if you have this person's work and it's licensed has the attribution share like, right? You can do whatever you want with it and you need to credit them, and you also need to have the attribution share like, so your work now can be used again by anyone. You can't just say, oh, I don't want nobody else to use it. No, you have to do that. Is it like that?
Could I think you explained it correctly, but could you repeat yourself?
Okay, so if you have someone's work
You
under
can you can
attribution,
you can give like an example.
let's say someone's music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have the attribution share like, so now you're to remix the song, put in some new beats, whatever, right? And you put it out there. You need to also license it with the attribution share like. You can't say, oh, I don't want nobody else to use it, so I put
Mm-hmm.
it on a different license. You have to put it back exactly
Mm-hmm.
on the attribution share like, so other people can remix your work as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, that's correct. So it's exactly as you said. So where's my cursor? Yeah. So with the first one, the attribution, you could take somebody's work, but then you don't have to go and apply the same license. You can now lock down your product that you just create. So like for instance, you go and remix somebody music, you can now say that nobody can use it without buying it, without paying for it. But with the share alike now, if somebody goes and remix your music, they have to apply the same license that you would have applied to your product. So if it was the CC BY and share alike, they have to put all of those licenses onto it. They can't just basically be selfish and keep it for themselves and try to monetize it for themselves. Good, so that was correct. Um, so the third one, attribution, no derivs. So that's ND, no derivs. This license lets others reuse the work for any purpose, including commercially. Because remember, BY is basically indicating commercially, right? However, it cannot be shared with others in adapted form, and credit must be provided to you. So they can reuse your work for whatever purpose they want to use it for, They can sell it back, but it cannot be shared with others in adapted form. Any idea what that means?
Yeah, I think I understand, but that word adopted form, it's like throwing me off.
Yeah, it's throwing me off also. Like, as it says you can reuse the work for any purpose. So I'm guessing you cannot modify it. This license lets others reuse the work. Because reuse only indicates that you can use it for whatever purpose. Like maybe you can take their music and add it in your movie, add it in your game, add it as your background song or whatever. Use it for whatever purpose, including commercially. However, it cannot be shared with others in adapted form. So the only thing I'm getting from this is that you cannot modify it. Because if you notice, it's clear from the other descriptions, remix, adapt, and build upon. Those are indication that you are modifying when you see remix, adapt, and build upon. So I'm assuming this is indicating that you're free to use it for whatever purpose, but you cannot modify it. And well, it would have been better if they specify that. Let me see if I get another explanation. CC, no derivatives. So it allows you to redistribute the material commercially, but use it. Yes, exactly. So that was correct. So it allows you to redistribute the material commercially or non-commercially, but the user cannot make any changes whatsoever to the original. So, as the name implies, no derivatives, no version state, no changes state. All right, so the next one, this one's going to be straightforward, non-commercial NC. So this license lets other remix, adapt, build upon your work non-commercially. And although their new work must be acknowledged by you and be non-commercial, they don't have to license their derivative work on the same terms. So it's not on the share alike. They don't have to license it at share alike. But they're not allowed to make money from it. They're free to use it, free to modify it, do whatever they want with it, but you're not allowed to modify it. I'm sorry, you're not allowed to monetize it. You're not allowed to make any money from it. All right, any questions from anyone? So this one here, we have attribution, non-commercial, and share alike. So this license lets others remix, adapt, build upon your work non-commercially as long as they credit you and license your new creation under identical terms. Attribution, non-commercial, and no derivatives. So this license is the most restrictive of the 6 main licenses, only allowing others to download your work and share them with others as long as they credit you, but they cannot change them in any way or use them commercially. So the licenses are relatively straightforward, but just that it might take some time to memorize all of them. Just remember BY, that's attribution. It basically means that you have to credit the person. Share alike, it's referring to sharing the product under the same license. No derivatives, you cannot make any change. Non-commercial, you cannot sell the product. And then it's basically a combination of all of that. Attribution, non-commercial, share alike. Yes, it's basically remembering. Is how much of them? 4 of them. Attribution, share alike, no derivative, and non-commercial. Yeah, it's basically 4 of them. and they're using different combinations. Any questions?
No, sir.
All right. So next, what is open data? Anybody want to make a guess? Do. So open data is data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirement to attribute and share alike. So why do we have open data and we have open source? What's the difference between the two? Anybody want to make a attempt at that?
Open data, it can be shared only within the share like subject, it's subjected only to the share like license, but open source it's not subjected to anything. You're completely free to use it as you please.
Good, good. That's a good one. Do. Now, also, open source, originally, when the term open source was created, it was actually referring to software. It was more referring to software. So, not sure if it's still the same today. Let's see if we can get that. Does open source only refer to software? The term open source refers to any program whose source code is made available for use, modification, and so on. Unlike proprietary software, open source and software is computer software, blah, 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 blah. So open to the public. So open source is only referring to software. It's only referring to programs being freely available. Whereas open data is basically going to refer to all other forms of data. The most obvious and fundamental difference between open data and open source is that the former focuses on data and the latter focuses on application. So it's just the type of data, the type of data specifically that it's making available to the public. It's like different categories of data is making available to the public. So open source, who is going to create it? A company. How corporate community, software development, open source community, output, open source program. All right, so that's unnecessary. So open source is only referring to software, whereas open data is referring to data. So now the question is, what kind of data? I'm assuming there would be data like maybe information about products, the stock market, the information data on like what is the most available product, what is the product with the highest demand, the government storing data on its citizens, like public information, um, the internet service provider storing information on its customers. So those are data, but some are going to be open data in that it's freely available to the public. So it all depends on what company or organization we're referring to. All right, so that's it for open data. So now, what is where's that page that I just closed? I should have added that also. So open source and open data. Good. So that's the difference between the two. So now, what is the difference between open source and public domain? So the short answer is that open source requires agreemental license. So we just talked about all the various terms of license that you can have with Creative Commons, whereas public domain is without restriction. So that's the difference there between the two. Open source, even though it is available to the public, it still has some sort of restriction towards it. Whereas public domain has no restriction. It's freely available to the public. Anyone is allowed to use it, and you will not be prosecuted in any way from any sort of misuse or so on. All right, so are we following so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right, so what's next? Well, we already looked at open data. We have free file formats. So what is a free file format? Or we can say open, free or open file formats. So alright, so open formats, also called free file formats, if they are not encumbered by any copyright, patent, trademark, and other restriction. For example, if they are in the public domain, so that anyone may use them at no monetary cost for any desired purpose. So let's see some examples. So you guys should be familiar with so open file formats are going to be like MP3, MP4, JPEG, PNG file formats. They are freely available to the public. Anyone is allowed to use them without any form of restriction. So with that in mind, there are file formats that you would actually have to pay to be able to use them. So for multimedia, we have available JPEG, PNG, SVG, all of these here. For text, we have HTML, ODF, PDF, and so on. So all of these here are free to use. So when we say they're free to use, in that anyone can design some sort of software in order to use that file format. They don't have to pay for using that file format. It's not proprietary. It's not under any copyright restriction. So that means we have what is called proprietary file formats. And obviously that means you would have to pay that organization to use it. So proprietary formats are typically controlled by a company or organization for its own benefits, and the restriction of its use by others is ensured through patents or trade secrets. It is thus intended to give the license holder exclusive control of the technology, current or future exclusion of others. So it's like if they want to ensure that if anybody wants to use their software or to work along with their software, they have to pay this company, they have to pay this business in order to be able to access their file format. Let me see if I get some examples. Examples of proprietary file formats. All right, so these are going to be some examples. So the same Office products that we use, Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, and so on, their file types are proprietary in that it's not open to the public. They're not free to use it. In order for you to use a software with this file type, you either use Microsoft Word or somebody who's going to develop a software for it, they would have to pay that company. They would have to maybe offer them royalty or some sort of fee in order to be able to use that proprietary file format. Think you guys understand that?
Yes, sir.
Arim, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
All right, so what is public domain software? All right, so public domain software refers to software not protected by copyright law of any nation that may be freely used without permission of or payment to the creator and that carries no warranties from or liabilities to the creator. So we learned about what is the public domain. The public domain basically something that is free to use by anyone without any restriction. So public domain software is basically just software that is in that public domain. So next we have collaboration, open collaboration. Can you guys think of any software that we can use for collaboration?
Docs.
Docs. Very good. Any other example?
I know Google Sheets allow you to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And PowerPoint, Google Slides.
Good. So open collaboration is collaboration that is egalitarian. Everyone can join. No principal or artificial barriers to participation exists. Meritocratic. Decisions and status are merit-based rather than imposed. And self-organizing. Processes adapt to people rather than people adapt to predefined process. So it's basically like the examples you mentioned, Google Doc, Google Sheet, Google Slides, and there are many other examples of other software that allows you to do collaboration. I'm looking for some examples. So examples, Google Sheets, Slides, Docs. We have Open Project. So Open Project is going to be, let me put the description also. Alright, so we have Rocket Chat. So Rocket Chat is a self-host open source collaboration software that brings team together, deemed as one of the best open source alternative to Slack. So Slack is another one. It helps them to communicate instantly, share updates on the go. It's used by international governments, defense departments, military organizations, and healthcare providers that provide the highest security and privacy standards. We have Open Project. So Open Project is an open source project management tool that allows teams to collaborate effectively in a secure environment. It allows you to combine agile, traditional, and waterfall project management methodologies in one platform. So have you guys ever heard of a job title that is the project manager? You guys know what is a project manager? So a project manager is basically a person who is responsible for managing a project, as the name implies. So, say for instance, the project is to build a software. Now, this person, this project manager, is responsible for gathering persons, delegating tasks, ensuring the tasks are completed on time, monitoring persons, getting update from these persons, giving them updates, giving out tasks, and so on. So instead of basically everybody talking to each other and trying to figure out what's happening, you have one person who's basically controlling everything, guiding everything, you can say basically. So that is where we have a lot of software that are built for these project managers, whereby it allows the employees to join the software and be able to see what tasks they are assigned to. They can see how the other teams are working, and they can comment on it, show their work, present on it, all forms of other collaboration they can do on a project. So that there is basically the open collaboration, examples of the open collaboration. All right, so we already talked about the open source software. That's basically making software available. Mhm. All right, so now we're going to look at the advantages of open source software. Any questions from anyone at this point in time?
No, sir.
All right. Open source software benefits for developers. So, a 7? All right, so open source software benefits are basically advantages. All right, so the first one we have there, quicker starts. So pre-built infrastructure means you can build upon existing framework instead of starting from scratch without having to endure the lengthy sales cycle you would with a proprietary product. And the more mature an open source project is, the more developed the foundation, documentation, and community will be. All right, any idea what that means? The first one, any idea? No comments? So the first advantage is that instead of you building a software from scratch, instead of you going and create a music from scratch, instead of you going and design a video from scratch, you can build upon what was already created. So you have a quicker start basically when it comes to open source projects. You could use somebody's work that's already in existence and basically add whatever feature you want to add, and that gives you a quicker start to your project. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit, faster, more transparent development. So closed source software. So we know what is closed source. Anybody wants to? Sorry, we know what is open source. Anybody want to tell us what is closed source software?
Isn't it basically opposite of open source?
Which means
It is like restricted. You can't really alter anything or change anything for it.
and you have to pay for it, right?
Yes.
So closed source software can often be a black box that neither developer nor businesses use who aren't programmers themselves. They can't meaningfully alter or enhance. As a result, when you experience challenges, you'll need to partner with vendor support agents or just wait until the vendor builds a solution to your problem. So the first, what it is highlighted there, basically saying that, like say for instance, Microsoft Office, that has a problem. Now, in order for that problem to be fixed, you have to wait until Microsoft acknowledges the problem. And then they're going to tell their team, look, this is a problem. I want you to prioritize it. I want you to work towards fixing it. If they don't, they will never fix it. Whereas open source projects give you full visibility into the code base, which means you can frequently code your solutions and directly document your issues in community spaces. And you may receive a variety of responses that provide as much or more context as you receive from professional support team. So what the last part there is basically saying that when you have a problem, you can go and fix it yourself, or you can reach out to a community of persons who are also working on this project, who have an interest in this project, and they would be able to offer you willingly their advice as to how to fix the problem, what to do to get it going again. So you don't have to wait on anybody to fix your software, to fix your project. The next one, better community-based collaboration. Work with an entire community of other developers, all using the same tools, who may have experienced similar issues and may already have solutions. So that's what I just said there in the previous benefits, that you can work with other persons who have a similar interest, who want to further develop this project, and they would willingly give their experience. They would willingly give their opinions, their thoughts, and their solutions. Scalability. Because different open source software, OSS is open source software, projects offer different configuration for hosting and load balancing, they can offer more flexibility concerning your need to scale data usage up or down. Any idea what this one means? No comments? All right, so scalability. Just think of the word scale. Scale meaning that you can shrink something, you could make it larger. So basically, because you're allowed to freely modify the open source software, you could design it so that it supports maybe 100 person, 1,000 person, 1,000,000 person. You can design it to scale up to that level. Or you could scale it down to only support 1 person, only support 2 person. So you have that flexibility. Community-driven security. Open source products often offer surprisingly robust security as teams tend to test extensively before releasing new versions. Many successful open source community attract security experts who also make additions to the project. That said, it may be worth mentioning that unless the community designates an ongoing security team, open source projects may lack a dedicated resource to ensure ongoing security. So, what they're basically saying is that because there's so many persons that have an interest in this open source software, they want to ensure it's perfect. They want to ensure everything is working with it, that is secure. Anyone can use it. So these persons freely offer themselves to protect the software, to ensure that nobody's going to misuse it, nobody has malicious code in the software. But not all of the community are like that. That's what the last paragraph here is saying. Not all the community are like that. Not all of them will have these persons that are so dedicated to security. So you still got to be careful when using open source software. Community-driven reliability. In the case of mature and popular projects, in particular, open source can offer surprisingly high reliability as many community members may have detected and already improved upon reliability issues. So basically, you get more reliability, you get more usability out of the project, out of the software, because persons are going to be seeing the issue and they're going to be trying to fix the issue as soon as they spot it. So it's not like how a company that is working for money, they're going to wait until all of their customers maybe complain, and then they might go and try to work on it. Because some companies are like that. Once it's nobody's complaining, they're not going to try to fix anything because it's not going to be worth it. Nobody's complaining, it means nobody using it. Whereas the community now, they're going to be more focused on trying to fix it because they want to get it to work. Low cost upfront. And of course, unlike proprietary software solution, most open source projects are free of charge by default, though they may have specific licensing restrictions. We can leave out the rest. Low cost on ongoing basis, depending on the nature of the license. Continuing to use open source product can mean lower or ongoing maintenance fee. In contrast to OSS, any proprietary counterparts will not only require upfront costs, but involve subscription fees and potential follow-on costs for additional service hours. So it's basically cheaper to run a open source software. You don't have to pay anyone. More employment opportunities. Some of the most widely used technical tools and operating systems on the market today are open source. The Linux operating system, Kubernetes container platform, Django, Python framework, and many others. Developers that are familiar with popular open source tools and are passionate enough to contribute to them can find it easier to locate new job opportunities with employers that recognize such valuable skills. So you basically get more employment opportunities there. Um, any questions so far? You guys following so far though? Mhm. All right, so the disadvantage, basically, it might be difficult to use because remember, persons are building it for themselves. So it might not look exactly like what you're accustomed to. So that can make it difficult to use. Once again, persons are building it for themselves. So it might not work with your computer, it might not work with your phone. So you might get compatibility issue. Um, Liabilities and warranties. You got to ensure you follow the correct license when you're using these products. Not because it's open source, that doesn't mean you're free to do whatever you want with it. Because remember, we looked at the Creative Commons. And then you have to be careful of hidden costs. Sometime, um, well, it's basically going to be the developers. Software that is free upfront but later costs money to run can be a major burden, especially if you haven't considered hidden costs from the outset. So basically, you develop the software, but you need money to continue running the software, to continue operating the software. Mhm. So these are some examples of open source software: Linux, Firefox, VLC, Sugar, CRM, GIMP, VNC, and so on. We already looked at what is OER, OER Commons. So OER Commons, we already looked at OER, which is open educational resource. It's a freely accessible online library that allows teachers and others to search and discover open educational resource and other freely available instructional materials. So some examples are going to be textbooks, PowerPoint slides by teachers, lecturers that they make available, podcasts, online courses, videos that persons might make and make available, quizzes that persons design and just make available to the public. Those are examples of open source, open educational resources. So even those like videos on YouTube, those are also examples. All right, so we looked at the advantages of open source. Examples of open source. Brief instruction. We looked at OER Commons. We looked at the examples. And we looked at the Creative Commons. All right, so that's the end there of Objective 10. Any questions before we close?
No question.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. You too.